We're moving north now from Esdraelon into Galilee. It's a region we don't think much about. We don't read much about. There's not a whole lot that happens there. There are some things that happen there that we will look at that are very important. We are all more familiar with the Sea of Galilee. We'll get there eventually this morning and look at all of the cities and the events and the kind of the characteristics of that region, mostly tied with the ministry of Jesus. It's a beautiful, beautiful place, the Sea of Galilee. I believe it was the last time we were there. We were at a restaurant hard on the Sea of Galilee on the northeast side somewhere. I don't remember. Maybe it was in Geb. But we're at a restaurant, we're eating lunch right overlooking the sea, and I looked out and saw ski jets. I mean, you talk about Home Depot, it's like ski jets. For many, 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 many years, they didn't allow motor vehicles on, and I guess ski jets maybe don't technically have motors, but it was pretty disappointing to see that. You want to relive the days of Jesus and see the boat sailing across, and then here goes a ski jet in front of you. In any case, things change over time, and it's unfortunate, I guess. But we love the Sea of Galilee, and we'll look at that this morning. Let's jump right into our notes. If you have questions along the way or comments, please feel free to jump in. All right. Where do we get the name Galilee? The name Galilee comes from the Hebrew word, of course, Galil, which means circle. So it's used for a district, or a circuit is the word we use in English, a circuit or a district. And so the name of this district is district. It's Galilee. Although this name is commonly associated only with the sea, the district of Galilee actually includes the entire northern region of Israel, north of Esdraelon, from the Mediterranean in the west to the Sea of Galilee and the Jordan Rift in the east. So Galilee technically is a really very large area, all the way from Esdraelon in the south up to Lebanon in the north, and then from the Mediterranean in the west to the Rift and the sea in the east. On our satellite map, it covers this large area, and we're going to try to get a hold of that region the first thing this morning before we move this later today into the Jordan Rift itself. The region as a whole can be divided into 3 sections, and usually those are divided into even smaller sections, but we'll go with the 3 sections. Lower Galilee in the south, Upper Galilee in the north, and of course that has to do with elevation again, and the lake region. So, Lower Galilee on our map is really this whole bottom section south of the Ramah Ridge. The Ramah Ridge you see there is the dividing line, because that huge ridge, north of that ridge, is Upper Galilee, and then we'll deal with the lake as a separate little region. We're going to cover those 3. Lower Galilee, Upper, and the sea. Galilee in general is rugged, mountainous, especially the farther north you get, especially the Ramah Ridge and north of there, but even southern Galilee has its ridges and valleys, which we'll look at. Ancient travel routes mainly follow east-west valleys that cross the lower or southern area of Galilee. So travel through this region is virtually confined to Lower Galilee. Hardly anybody is traveling through Upper Galilee unless it's over by the Jordan Rift. All right, so we're going to be moving east and west along these ridges and valleys, particularly the valleys in Lower Galilee, and we'll try to get a sense of those in just a minute. Hiram of Lebanon, Hiram is the one who sent the trees down, the cedars down to Joppa, and were hauled up to Jerusalem for Solomon to build the temple. Solomon in return gave him some property in Galilee. And here's what he said about it. Hiram, king of Tyre, had supplied Solomon with cedar and cypress timber, gold according to all his desire, and King Solomon gave Hiram 20 cities in the land of Galilee. So Hiram came out of Tyre to see the cities which Solomon had given him. They did not please him. He said, "What are these cities you've given me, my brother?" So they were called the land of Kabul to this day. Kabul means good for nothing. Thank you. Not a fair trade, but that was his opinion. In fact, everybody's opinion of Galilee was pretty negative. It was pagan. It was backwards. Matthew 4, leaving Nazareth, he went and lived in Capernaum by the sea in the territory of Zebulun and Naphtali. That's up in Galilee. So that what was spoken by the prophet Isaiah might be fulfilled. The land of Zebulun, the land of Naphtali, the way of the sea, there's the Via Maris. Beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles, the people who dwell in darkness, have seen a great light. Those dwelling in the region of the shadow of death, to them light has dawned. It is interesting to me that most of Jesus' ministry was in this, pagan, backwoods kind of place that nobody wanted to be. They had the darkest place had the greatest light. And that's a fulfillment of Isaiah, but you see what people thought of Galilee. John 1, Philip found Nathanael, said to him, "We found him of whom Moses and the laws and the prophets wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph. We found the Messiah." And Nathanael said, "Can any good thing come out of Nazareth?" It's like, that's in Galilee. Philip said, "Come and see." John 7, Nicodemus, who'd gone to him before and who was one of them, said, so Nicodemus, a Pharisee, now has talked to Jesus, has come to believe in Jesus. And he says to his fellow unbelieving Pharisees, "Does our law judge a man without first giving him a hearing and learning what he does?" And they said, "Are you from Galilee too? Search and see that no prophet arises from Galilee." Now, are you a Galilean? We know that that's a kind of a derogatory term. It's interesting that they say no prophet arises from Galilee because Jonah came from Galilee. And we'll see that today. But in any case, it was a despised, backward, dark pagan, kind of heavily Gentile kind of area because it's a transition region from all of the world to the north and Israel south of Galilee and in, the regions we've talked about already. Let's try to get a hold of these hills and mountains that are important to our discussion. First are the horns of Hittim. The horns of Hittim are actually an extinct volcanic cone that have worn down over, this volcanic cone has worn down over time. You know what? I'm going to use my little thing I haven't used all week yet. So, this volcanic cone, kind of like the Herodium, that sticks up over time, that has worn down and eroded and so forth, so that now it looks kind of like that. And it's a very distinct, actually one of these is lower than the other, but it's a very distinct mountain, hill, that you can see from all over the place, that it's going to kind of define the way the road comes. Remember, we come through the Megiddo Pass, kitty corner across the Esdraelon Valley between the Hill of Moreh and Mount Tabor, right? And then the road turns north. It's turning straight north to avoid the horns of Hittim. And then it's going to turn right and go down a crack through Mount Arbel that Don mentioned a moment ago. Anyway, we need to know the horns of Hittim for two reasons. They're very obviously seen, so they're going to keep us oriented as to where we are, and they define the way the Via Maris goes through this area. All right. The horns of Hittim, and then Mount Arbel, as Don mentioned earlier, his favorite place, and we have to go there. You've got to go there and see Mount Arbel. You have to stand on it, and we'll do that today in our slides. Mount Arbel forms the western cliffs of the Sea of Galilee. So think of the Sea of Galilee, and the western side, there's this huge, up on the northwestern corner of the Sea of Galilee is this huge, huge mountain, these cliffs. It's Mount Arbel, and there's a big crack in that mountain through which the road, once you get around the Horns of Hittim, the road is going to curve down and go through that crack in Mount Arbel. We want to go up on top of Mount Arbel. You can see the whole Sea of Galilee and all kinds of wonderful things from up there. So on our map, this weird little shape right here represents the Horns of Hittim. Here's Mount Arbel stretching really across this whole thing here. And the road is going to, let me just do the whole road here again. We're coming from the coast, right, from Aphek through the Megiddo Pass, kitty corner across the valley of Ezreelan, between Mount Tabor and here's Mount Tabor and the Hill of Moreh. We're going between them. We have to turn straight north to get around the Horns of Hittim, and then we can make a right turn and go right through this crack in Arbel, and we're on a plain, the plain of Gennesaret, right at the northwest corner of the Sea of Galilee, and we can head on north to the rest of the world. So the Horns of Hittim and Mount Arbel are very important to our discussion, and that's why we mention them and we put them on our map. They're part of Lower Galilee. All right? Here are the Horns of Hittim, Mount Arbel. You can see the Sea of Galilee right there. Here's a close-up of the Horns of Hittim and Mount Arbel. It's kind of hard to see from this perspective, but here's the crack in Mount Arbel. So our road is coming around the west side of the Horns of Hittim and drop down into this crack in Mount Arbel, and we end up on the plain of Gennesaret right at the northwest side of the Sea of Galilee. So the Via Maris, the main international route, came from Joppa and Aphek on the coast through the Megiddo Pass, crossed the Ezreelan, passing between the Hill of Moreh and Mount Tabor. From there it turns north to circumvent the Horns of Hittim, then east through a crack in the Arbel Ridge, opening to the northern plains, the plain of Gennesaret on the Sea of Galilee. Here comes our road from Aphek, Megiddo, between Moreh and Tabor, north to circumvent the Horns of Hittim, down through the crack onto the plain of Gennesaret, and on to the rest of the world. Very, very important to think about that. When I think about that, you know, again, to walk where Jesus walked, especially in Jerusalem, it's like 30 feet underground. Well, they've dug some of that out, and there are places where you may be able to walk where Jesus walked. It's very hard to tell. There are a couple of places. But when you walk or see this crack in Mount Arbel and the little dirt road that goes through there, it's like, yep, he went through here. And that's pretty neat to think about. He probably went through there multiple times. So there's the Nazareth Ridge, here's Mount Tabor, the Hill of Moreh, and again, our road is going between the two, avoiding the Horns of Hittim, right here, through the crack of Mount Arbel, onto the plain of Gennesaret. Forgive me for overdoing this, but we now see the edge of the Sea of Galilee here. Here's Mount Arbel. Here's the plain of Gennesaret. Here's that big crack right through the mountain. And here are the Horns of Hittim. The Megiddo Pass is way over here. There's Mount Tabor, the Hill of Moreh. Here comes our road way over there from Megiddo, between Tabor and Moreh, north to avoid the Horns of Hittim. And now we can see it dropping down through this crack in Mount Arbel onto the plain of Gennesaret. You just really need to get a grasp of that route. Here are the Horns of Hittim. Again, one of the horns is kind of broken off. As we're kind of driving past them on that northern road to circumvent them, we need to get around this extinct volcano. Now we're standing on the Horns of Hittim, and we're looking at Mount Arbel, and notice that big break in Mount Arbel. It's beautiful to see. It's amazing to think about. How did that get there? I mean, God obviously caused at some point an earthquake to break this mountain in half. so that you could travel around the Horns of Team where we're standing down into this crack and out onto this beautiful plain, the plain of Gennesaret, right on the north end of the Sea of Galilee. What you really want to do is go past this little kibbutz here and up this road and stand on Mount Arbel. It's what Don just said was his favorite thing to do, and it is a wonderful, wonderful thing to do. We're flying over the crack on Mount Arbel, the road going right through here. There's the plain of Gennesaret, this beautiful Sea of Galilee. Let's drive up this road and let's stand up on Mount Arbel. Here we are. There's people right here. And this huge, huge cliff where they're looking out at the Sea of Galilee. Here's that large crack going through the mountain, providing access from, the Horns of Team and Upper Galilee down to the Sea of Galilee. We're down on a road now. We're down on the road here's the road. We just have come off the plain of Gennesaret. The Sea of Galilee is just to our left, 100 yards or so. We're going to go down by the base of Mount Arbel, but we're going to turn into the crack and start to walk up the road that goes through this crack in Mount Arbel. High cliffs on our right as we head up to try to get up to Galilee. And of course, the larger part of Mount Arbel up there on our left, where we were just standing way up there at the top. And on you go up toward the top as far as you have time to hike. And you turn around and you look down the crack, down toward the plain of Gennesaret, which is, a little behind the trees here, and the Sea of Galilee. Both sides, the crack of Mount Arbel are towering over us on both sides of this dusty road. And again, Jesus went from Nazareth and the region of Lower Galilee to the Sea of Galilee many, many times, right? Back and forth, Cana and Galilee and Nazareth and the sea, and back and forth he went, and there's just no doubt in my mind that he would have traveled this road many, many times. So let's move back over to Lower Galilee and look at the ridges and valleys in Lower Galilee, more over toward the west, nearer the Mediterranean Sea. Ridges and valleys that create this east-west travel through Lower Galilee, where pretty much everyone has to travel in Galilee. Very difficult to travel in Upper Galilee. Starting in the north is the Ramah Ridge. I already mentioned the Ramah Ridge because it is the ridge that divides northern Galilee from southern Galilee. North of the Ramah Ridge is a very high scarp. North of the Ramah Ridge is northern Galilee. South of the Ramah Ridge is lower Galilee. So it separates Upper and Lower Galilee. The valley at the base of the Ramah Ridge is the Beit Kerem Valley. And the Beit Kerem Valley then provides the northern route from Akko, out there on the coast. I'll show you the map in a minute. You maybe are looking at it. From Akko over to near a town called Zaphat that we'll look at, and then it kind of turns north and continues up into northern Galilee and eventually drops down into the Rift. So this is an east-west route between Akko and Upper Galilee, but it doesn't really easily lead to the Sea of Galilee. Here's the Ramah Ridge and the Beit Kerem Valley. And you see this road coming from Akko toward the Sea of Galilee, but this is very rough and rugged right in here, as we'll see in a minute. So if you're going from Akko to Zaphat or Merom or Kadesh, great. This is the road you're going to take, but very few people are going to Zaphat, Merom, Kadesh. They want to get to the Sea of Galilee area, much more easy to travel down here in the Rift. So this is a northern, remote kind of road that doesn't lead to hardly anywhere you really want to go. But there is a road. In fact, there's a modern highway, tar road, through the Beit Kerem Valley. In any case, this would be the way you might travel way, way up in the north, but very few people would be traveling there. The Ramah Ridge and the Beit Kerem Valley. You can see it very clearly on our satellite map. Very steep ridge with a very narrow valley at its base. That's the Rama Ridge. Northern Galilee up here, southern Galilee region right in here. In fact, this whole thing right here would be southern Galilee. Some east-west travel, but it really doesn't lead. I mean, you can see when you get to the eastern end here that it's just all mountainous and difficult, and everything's really going to turn north and go up through Upper Galilee toward the more northern regions of the Jordan Rift, right? So let's move farther south. There's kind of a broken area south of the Beit Haram Valley. There are a couple other ridges and valleys there that aren't really important to us, but the next important ridge and valley is the Jatapata Ridge. It's called that because the city of Jatapata sits atop of it. The Jatapata Ridge, it's central. It's right kind of in the smack in the middle of southern Galilee. The valley at its base is the Beit Netofa Valley, and if the Jatapata Ridge is the central ridge, then the Beit Netofa Valley is like the central valley. This would be the best valley as the bird flies to travel from east to west through Lower Galilee. But guess what? It gets swampy. And so you can't really travel there. It's the perfect, broad, fertile valley to travel east and west, right in the middle of Lower Galilee. But at the eastern end, there are ridges and mountains and stuff, and the water just backs up in there, and it becomes a big mush, and you really can't travel east and west through there. So here's the Jatapata Ridge. Notice in Lower Galilee, it's right smack in the middle. I mean, here's Esdraelon, here's the Rama Ridge, the Jatapata Ridge is right smack in the middle, and the Beit Netofa Valley is right next to it, and it'd be great if we could just travel from Akko right through the Beit Netofa Valley and the Arbel Crack, but it's just impassable, and I'll show you why in just a minute. That'd be a great way to travel, but we can't do it. Here's the Jatapata Ridge. And of course, see that broad valley beneath it? The Beit Netofa Valley, Jatapata Ridge, Beit Netofa Valley, but look at this at the eastern end. You know, the Horns of Beacham are here, and all this kind of this mountainous, former volcanic region creates a huge dam at the eastern end so that all the water falling in here is just collecting, and you really cannot travel through the Beit Netofa Valley, though, of course, from Akko to the Crack and Arbel, it's the most direct way. Can't do it. So, next is a small little half ridge, the Turan Ridge, just south of the Jatapata Ridge. South of the Beit Netofa Valley is the Turan Ridge, a small little half-size ridge. It's only half as long as the Jatapata and the Rama Ridge. Next to it is the Turan Valley. My students always like it when the ridge and the valley have the same name. I don't have to memorize something else. The Turan Ridge, and south of it, the Turan Valley. And this then because you can't travel through the Beit Netofa Valley, this becomes the main way to travel east and west through Lower Galilee, south of this half Turan Valley, Turan Ridge, through the Turan Valley. And of course, south of that, creating the southern rim of the Turan Valley, is the Nazareth Ridge, which we've already seen last session, yesterday. So there's this little tiny Turan Ridge and the valley beneath it, and then you see the Nazareth Ridge defining the southern edge of the Turan Valley, and that's going to become the main way. Then you see our road coming from Akko into Lower Galilee, avoiding Beit Netofa Valley because it's all swampy, coming around the Turan Ridge, hitting the Via Maris. Now we're on the main road. Now we're on the interstate. Now we can go past the Horns of Beacham, through the Crack of Mount Arbel, and get to the rest of the world. So the Turan Valley is the way to travel through eastern Lower Galilee. Make sense? There's the little Turon Ridge. And there's the Nazareth Ridge, right smack between the two, is the way we're going to travel through lower Galilee to this crack here in Mount Arbel and onto the plain of Gennesaret. All right, now we know how to travel through the region. There's our main route, our Via Maris, coming between the Hill of Moria and Mount Tabor, turning north to avoid the Horns of Hattim, through the crack in Arbel. Forgive me for saying this a million times. You know, the key to learning, according to William James, is repetition. Repetition is the key to learning. So forgive me, but there it is. Between Moray and Tabor, turning north to avoid the Horns of Hattim, through the crack in Arbel onto the plain of Gennesaret. That's the main road. And to get from Akko and through lower Galilee to that road, to get from the coast to that road, we're going to go through the Turon Valley, which is between the Turon Ridge and the Nazareth Ridge. Right? Now we have control of Galilee. We know the lines of communication up there. Important cities in Galilee, of course, starting in the south, Nazareth. Nazareth today is this huge, sprawling kind of metropolis thing. But in Jesus' day, it was a small, rather insignificant New Testament city. John 1, can any good thing come out of Nazareth? Right? It was the home of Joseph and Mary, both of David's line, who originated down there in Bethlehem. I was asked this morning, and it's weird, I'd never really thought about this question. You know, why are Mary and Joseph, both who are descendants of David, even living up in Nazareth? And the text, I don't believe, ever tells us exactly why they're living there. I mean, there's the text that says he will be called a Nazarene, which has its own interesting, debatable context. But anyway, I think probably because the next city, I believe it's the next city, one of the cities we're going to talk about is Sepphoris. What was Joseph's occupation? He's a carpenter, right? But he's a builder. Really, when you think of Joseph, don't think so much about boards and lumber like I did when I was a kid, a carpenter, right? What do they build stuff out of up there? Stone, right? So he knows how to work with wood, but he knows how to work with stone. And they are building a town we'll talk about in just a minute, very near Nazareth. I'd say within 2 miles, maybe 5 at the most. They're building a huge Roman city. It's by the name of Sepphoris. It's going to become a regional capital for Rome, controlling southern Galilee, as we'll see in a moment. They're building Sepphoris, and there's work there for stonemasons, carpenters. And it may very well be that Joseph moved there because of that. I traveled to Britain once on my way to Romania. We had a branch campus in Romania for a while. And I traveled to Great Britain on my way to Romania and stayed a week because my people were from Great Britain, Beacham, which is Norman into Great Britain. But anyway, I knew where they had come from, the town that they had originated in. And so I flew in, I rented a car, I drove up to this little town, Clutton in Somerset. And it's just gorgeous there. And I found a B&B and I stayed with a guy. We became very good friends. And I said, why in the world would my people leave? They moved to Wales from there. And I said, why would they leave here? And he said, well, they were coal miners and the coal ran out. So they moved to Wales, which is coal mining country. And guess where they moved from Wales when that coal ran out? They moved to Scranton, Pennsylvania. Coal country. You move because that's where the work is. So why did Joseph move to Nazareth from Bethlehem? I'm guessing, we're not told, but that's where the work probably was, and perhaps because of Sepphoris. So here are Mary and Joseph, both living in Nazareth, and of course they meet and fall in love, although that's not really the way it works back then. They were, engaged, betrothed by their parents to be married And this became eventually, the story, the home of Jesus, and he spent his childhood here. There's Nazareth. We looked at it yesterday a little bit on top of the Nazareth Ridge. You see very clearly the Nazareth Ridge. I mean, that's a city. You see the white there, that's all buildings and houses, and the city is just sprawled on top of this ridge. The city of Nazareth in Jesus' day was a tiny, tiny little thing, though now it's this huge, sprawling metropolis. Here's the church built over the very place where the angel Gabriel came to Mary and announced that she would have a child. All right, just north of Nazareth, on the north side of the Nazareth Ridge, looking down into the Turon Valley, is this other tiny little town, and it's still a tiny little town, Gath-Hepher. Gath-Hepher was the home of Jonah. He fled from here. God appeared to Jonah. I'm surprised there's not a church built over the very spot. Right? Anyway, God appeared to Jonah in this little town of Gath-Hepher, just north of Nazareth, on the Nazareth Ridge, just overlooking the Turon Valley. And God appeared to Jonah and said, "Go to Nineveh and preach the gospel to them." How would he get to Nineveh? He's right on the Turon Valley. Go down the hill, hang a right, hit the Via Maris, you're in Nineveh. Right? I mean, it's right there. It's easy to get there. And Jonah went to Joppa, the totally opposite way, right? Probably, across the Nazareth Ridge or over to the Shimron Pass, which we talked about yesterday. Shimron Pass, maybe to the Jokneam Pass or the Megiddo Pass, and right down to Joppa, and off he goes into the Mediterranean. Anyway, here's the home of Jonah, Gath-Hepher, right on the northern side, right here of the Nazareth Ridge, overlooking the Turon Valley, where he could hop right on the Via Maris and head up to Nineveh. But no, he goes south, probably through the Megiddo Pass and on to Joppa. Here's an aerial view. Nazareth is really kind of under us. Here's Gath-Hepher. Here's the Turon Ridge. Here's the Turon Valley. There's the impassable Beit Netofa Valley, Jatapata Ridge. By the way, don't forget to look everywhere. Look in the distance here. This high ridge, that's the Ramah Ridge. Northern Galilee is north of the Ramah Ridge. So there's the Ramah Ridge, the Jatapata Ridge, the little Turon Ridge, Nazareth Ridge, and here's Gath-Hepher. Let's jump down on, here's an aerial view of Gath-Hepher. We're actually looking north again into the Turon Valley. There's a modern road right through the Turon Valley. There is no modern road. Well, there might be a modern road in the Beit Netofa Valley, but everyone pretty much drives still in the Turon Valley. There's the Turon Ridge. And here's Gath-Hepher. You can see the Tel right there at the top. Here's Tel Gath-Hepher from the road just north of the Nazareth Ridge, down in the Turon Valley. All right, Cana of Galilee. Cana of Galilee was situated at the base of the southern slope of the Jatapata Ridge, overlooking the Beit Netofa Valley. This is where Jesus turned water into wine and was found when the nobleman from Capernaum came to seek healing for his son. So no doubt he had relatives in Cana of Galilee. And Cana of Galilee is right here on the southern slopes of the Jatapata Ridge, a little bump right at the bottom of the Jatapata Ridge, which is where Cana of Galilee was. Here, way in the distance, the Ramah Ridge, right? Jatapata Ridge, right at the base of the Jatapata Ridge is this little bump, Cana of Galilee. Here's our impassable Beit Netofa Valley. Here's the Turon Ridge. Here is Cana of Galilee. By the way, there is a modern city of Cana. I'll show you in just a minute. Your guide may tell you, we're going through Cana of Galilee where Jesus turned water into wine. No, I don't think so. This little hill here is most likely, if not certainly, Cana of Galilee. Here's the Turon Ridge, Turon Valley, Beit Netofa Valley, impassable. Here's Cana, this little bump on the Jatapata Ridge. There it is. Beit Netofa, Cana Jatapata Ridge, Jatapata, at the top of the ridge. There's the Rama Ridge, defining northern and southern, right? Cana of Galilee. We are now standing kind of, let's say, where Gath Hefer is. We're on the kind of the north side of the Nazareth Ridge. We're looking at modern Kfar Cana. This is the modern city of Cana of Galilee, which is where your guide may tell you that Jesus turned water into wine. Here's the Turon Ridge, the Turon Valley. There's the Jatapata Ridge, and way over here is going to be Cana of Galilee. But we're looking at really at the Turon Valley. Let's turn to the right a little bit. Here's where everyone's traveling in the Turon Valley, heading over this way to near the Horns of Atim, which are, I think, right off our picture here, and then the Crack of our Bell and down to the rest of the world. All right. We'll see Cana of Galilee again when we are standing at this town, Sepphoris, right? This is the town I mentioned earlier. Sepphoris was an urban center in New Testament times. Sepphoris is not mentioned, I don't believe, in the Bible anywhere, but it became a Roman urban center. It became really the controlling Roman city in Lower Galilee. It controlled regional government, regional trade, and regional commerce because it's overlooking the Turon Valley and the Shimron Pass coming in from Israel, and it's sitting at that intersection, and it's controlling everything going on here in Lower Galilee. That's why the Romans built this city, and they're building it in the days of Jesus' childhood, and Joseph, no doubt, well, we don't know for sure, but probably is, commuting there every day or every Monday through Friday, or, well, Thursday for them, Sunday through Thursday, right? To work here at Sepphoris. The Old Testament counterpart to Sepphoris was Hanathon. Hanathon was the Old Testament regional center, and it's very near to Sepphoris. It ruled the region in Old Testament times. It was a border city of Zebulun, Joshua 19. It's mentioned both in Egyptian and Assyrian annals. They wanted to control Hanathon because Hanathon controls Lower Galilee, because it's sitting there in the Turon Valley, very near the Turon Valley, where the Shimron Pass is coming in from Esdraelon. So these New Testament and Old Testament cities control both the Shimron Pass coming from Esdraelon, we talked about yesterday, and the Turon Pass going east and west, the main route through Lower Galilee. Here they are, these kind of twin cities, New Testament and Old Testament. Sepphoris, very near Nazareth, kind of on the northern slopes of the Nazareth Ridge, and Hanathon right down here in the valley. Notice again, both of them are overlooking, as it were, the road from Akko through the Turon Ridge to the Via Maris, as well as the Shimron Pass, remember, that came between the Nazareth Ridge and the western Lower Galilee hills. The Shimron Pass and these two cities are controlling that intersection. New Testament Sepphoris, Old Testament Hanathon. That's the Shimron Pass, and there's the Turon Pass. All right, here's our view again on our satellite. Here's the Rama Ridge. Here's the Jatapata Ridge with Cana. Here's the impassable Beit Natofa Valley, a little bit of the Turon Ridge. There's Hanathon, governing the road coming in from Akko, and this Shimron Pass. Here's Sepphoris on this hill, governing the same intersection right there. There comes the Shimron Pass from the south, Esdraelon. Here comes the Turon Road, let's say, from Akko, both of them passing by Hanathon, Old Testament, Sepphoris, New Testament. Here's an aerial view of Sepphoris. Sepphoris was not, they didn't begin to excavate that until, I lose track of time, but I mean, I'm going to say maybe the 90s is when, everybody was getting excited about what they were finding there at Sepphoris. Again, it's very Roman, which you can tell by seeing what? a theater, right? All kinds of excavations up here on the upper tell, some down here on the lower tell, which we'll look at briefly. We are very interested in this building right here because, first of all, there's a little museum in there. It's air conditioned, nice bathrooms, right? But what we want to do, guess what, is once we get some air conditioning and bathrooms, we want to go up on the roof and we want to look around, okay? We're not terribly interested in the Roman city. Okay, we'll look at some of that stuff, but we really want to get up on the roof here and get a control in our minds of how Lower Galilee works. There's the theater. Again, the Romans were just famous for these are little pieces of broken tile that are put together in little pieces. They didn't have rugs and carpets, right? So this is what they did with their floors. This one is in the shape of, there's a Greek or Latin word for it, I forget, but it's in the shape of where your table would be. Your table wouldn't be like our dining room tables like these where you put a chair next to them. They'd be very low. You'd put couches next to them. You'd recline at the table, and this is like under the table. They're just gorgeous mosaics, and they found one mosaic that became very famous down here at the end of this mosaic. They call her the Mona Lisa of Sepphoris, if I remember correctly. Let's get a close-up of that. I mean, this is fine little pieces of tile. Look at the artistry of that. Look at the blush on her cheek, the shadow. I mean, it's just absolutely gorgeous, the Mona Lisa of Sepphoris. So the Romans knew how to build. They knew how to decorate. They were extravagant in their spending. Again, I'm somehow reminded of Minnesota. I don't know why, but anyway. We have to remember, I've mentioned it now a bunch of times, the Shimron Pass. It was kind of insignificant when we looked at Esdraelon, but it's very, very important to Lower Galilee because the Shimron Pass is how you're getting from the valley of Esdraelon, Jezreel, into Lower Galilee. This is the main way to get into Lower Galilee, which is why Hanathon and Sepphoris are built at that intersection. There's the Shimron Pass between the Nazareth Ridge and the hills of western Lower Galilee. All right. So again, Nazareth Ridge, the Shimron Pass is going to come right through there. It's still there. It's obviously still there. There's a road that goes right through it. And Sepphoris and Hanathon are governing that road, especially where the intersection is. I don't know if I have this one. Yep. Coming from Akko to the Turan Pass and off to the Via Maris. There's Hanathon and Sepphoris. All right. We are standing on that building at Sepphoris. We're looking, let me just back up a little bit. We're standing at Sepphoris and we're looking toward the Shimron Pass. I want to give you a feel for the Shimron Pass. The problem is there's a hill here in the way. We can't really see it very well. The Shimron Pass is right between these two ridges. So down, not where this reservoir is, but behind this hill and before this one. Does that make sense to you? Down in that valley is the Shimron Pass. We're going to turn to the right. That pass down in this valley is entering right here until Hanathon is coming into our picture. Now let's turn right again. And you can see some of the ruins of Sepphoris. Tel Hanathon is right here. Let's see if I have an arrow. Yep. Very clearly seen Tel Hanathon from Sepphoris, controlling everything coming in from the Shimron Pass and everything coming in from the coast, the plain of Asher from Akko. There's a telephoto of Hanathon. And here comes the road that's heading toward the Turan Pass and the Via Maris. That's the Jatapata Ridge. If that's the Jatapata Ridge, again, we've turned to the right from our last picture. We're on that building at Sepphoris, and here's this little bump on the Jatapata Ridge. That is Cana of Galilee, where Jesus turned the water into wine. So if you're at Sepphoris and get on the top of the building, you want to look for the Shimron Pass, and you want to turn north. Well, you want to see Hanathon, and then you want to look at Cana of Galilee, where Jesus turned water into wine. Here's the Beit Netofa Valley that's impassable. So this modern road right here, where these trucks and cars and buses and all this stuff, they're heading right into the Turan Pass, the valley, that's going to take us to the Via Maris. Let's talk about Jotapata. We just saw the Jotapata Ridge. Jotapata is not really a biblical city. It's not an important place. I've never actually been up there. I really don't care to get up there. But this was the home of Josephus, the Jewish historian in the Roman era. The Romans were taking over Palestine, Israel. Jerusalem fell in 70 AD, right? The whole Masada thing a couple of years later. We'll talk about another place, Gamala, that fell about that time. They captured Jotapata. They captured Josephus, who lived in Jotapata, and he was a historian, and they kind of befriended him in a way, and they let him travel with them as they conquered, and he wrote history. He wrote a history of ancient Israel, but then he also recorded the history of the Roman capture of Palestine and so forth, and this is where Josephus lived. So if you know anything about Josephus, you're interested in him, this is his hometown. There's the city of Jotapata on top of the Jotapata Ridge. Here's stuff we've seen, Sepphoris, Hanathon, Gath Hefer, Cana, the Jotapata Ridge. And up on top there, kind of on the northern slopes, is right here, Tel Jotapata. That's the home of Josephus, if you're interested in Josephus. Upper Galilee. We've looked at Lower Galilee. Everything's traveling east-west, mainly through that Turan Valley and coming in from Israel and through the Shimron Pass. Sepphoris, Hanathon, probably the most important cities in biblical times, controlling that intersection, the Shimron Pass and the Turan Valley. All right, let's go to Upper Galilee. Upper Galilee is rugged, high mountains, angled valleys. Near the Lebanon border, the farther north you get, these mountaintops are cut off. They look like a guy with the old flat top haircut. There are large tablelands up there, a lot of water. I mean, so with all of the water, you'd think there'd be a lot of people and a lot of, crop growing and maybe grazing, but it's just so difficult to get there and so remote that it's not very habitable, though there are some towns there. And the biblical ones are more toward the Jordan Rift area that we want to look at. Okay, so here's Upper Galilee. Let's see if I can get you through that quickly. Remember, the Ramah Ridge right here becomes the defining border between Lower Galilee and Upper Galilee, the Ramah Ridge. So we're north of the Ramah Ridge, and one of the important biblical towns is Merom. The problem is nobody knows where it is, where it was. The exact location of Merom is debated, although it doubtless was situated near Mount Merom, one of the highest peaks, 4,000 feet. But Merom, strangely enough, in my mind, I just can't imagine them fighting up here for whatever reason, but this is where Joshua defeated the northern coalition of the Canaanites. Let me just quickly, if I can't do anything quickly, but let me quickly talk about the conquest, right? They came in from Jordan, the country of Jordan, Transjordan, right, east of the Jordan River. They came in right across from Jericho. Moses had died. Joshua brings him across. The Jordan River splits. He brings him across. They defeat Jericho. Eventually, they defeat Ai. The Gibeonites do their ruse. There's a league between the Israelites and the Gibeonites, and everybody in the south then, all the Canaanites in the south know that, essentially what's happened is Joshua has split the country in two, right? Because Gibeon is on the Benjamin Plateau. Mizpah, right, is the halfway point between Dan and Beersheba, essentially. So in coming in from the east and getting up to the watershed at Gibeon and the Benjamin Plateau, he split everything in two. And the southern Canaanites believe they're the next to be fought. I mean, because they come up and try to fight against Gibeon and Israel, the battle of the long day, they flee back down to their cities in the Philistia and southern Judah. And so Joshua proceeds to defeat those cities in the south one by one. Now the southern cities are defeated. They meet at Mount Ebal. They, do the blessings and curses. They set up the stone with the law. And now the Canaanites in the north know that they're next. The south has been defeated. The north is next to be defeated. And so the Canaanites of the north gather all the remnants, whoever's left down there in the south, and everybody in the north, and they meet here at Merom for the northern battle for Canaan and the land of promise. The exact location is debated, but it's somewhere near Mount Merom, and here's where Joshua defeated the northern coalition. So we're going to put Merom right there on our map, ? And Mount Merom, Har Merom, this is just very near the peak, the highest point of Merom, up on one of those plateaus where a battle could take place. We're just looking. I just wanted to give you a picture. It really doesn't matter what direction we're looking, but you see the high peak of Merom there. This is the highest point. Of course, there's always satellite dishes and cell phone towers and stuff up there. And you see kind of a plain down here where there is a village and you could, wage a war. So let's call this city, village Merom. And this is where the northern Canaanites are going to coalesce and fight against Joshua. Joshua defeats them. The other town we want to look at up here is Kadesh of Naphtali. Another thing that I should have paid my wife to ask. I thought Kadesh was somewhere else. I thought, there's more than one Bethlehem in the Bible. There's more than one Kadesh. You see these place names. You're going to be reading your Bible and you say, oh, here's a town. We talked about that town. And here's the dot on Beacham's map. But wait a minute, that's not what this is. Well, I grew up in Newton, Kansas. There's a Newton, Massachusetts. There's a Newton, Iowa. There's Newtons all over the place. Kadesh, all over the place. So this is Kadesh of Naphtali. So you may find towns of the same name in different places of your Bible. You need to be a little aware and careful perhaps of that. But anyway, Kadesh of Naphtali was a dominant city in Upper Galilee. It's right overlooking the Jordan Rift, which makes it a little easier to get to than way up there at Merom and back in the kind of backwoods. This is right on the edge of civilization, looking down into the Jordan Rift. This is Kadesh of Naphtali. On the cliffs overlooking the rift at the Hula Basin. It's interesting. I should have changed that spelling. Let me talk for a minute about the Hula Basin. First of all, there was a little lake north of the Sea of Galilee in biblical times. North of the Sea of Galilee, you'll see in the older Bible atlases, in Bible atlases that show you older times, there was another lake north of the Sea of Galilee, a tiny little lake called Lake Hula. Okay, now, over the years, I've seen all kinds of different spellings for hula. The Institute of Holy Land Studies preferred H-U-L-E-H. I think this little atlas here does H-U-L-E-H. As I was preparing for this class, I decided to go with the current spelling. If you look at Lake Hula today, which exists, we'll talk about that later, in Israel, it's H-U-L-A. So I've tried to change most of my slides to H-U-L-A. I missed it here. You're going to see H-U-L-A on my maps. You're going to say H-U-L-E-H. Please forgive me for that inconsistency. It drives me nuts when I do that. But my point is that this can be spelled many different ways. I warned you about that at the beginning of our week. Anyway, Lake Hula, this little lake north of Galilee, Kadesh looks down into the Jordan Rift, more near this northern little lake, Lake Hula, than down by, of course, the Sea of Galilee, which is more familiar to us. This was one of the 3 cities of refuge. Those are interesting to study in your Bible now. One of the 3 cities of refuge west of the Jordan. It was Kadesh, way up here. Shechem, we know where that is, right? The first capital, down there between Ebal and Gerizim, and then Hebron, way in the south. So if you killed somebody accidentally or on purpose, you could flee to one of these cities and have judgment to see if you were guilty or not, and it all depended on the outcome. But this was the northernmost city of refuge on the western side of the Jordan River. So that makes it somewhat important. People had to know where that was. This Kadesh was also the home of Barak, and there was a Kadesh down in eastern lower Galilee, which I'll show you in a minute. It's difficult to determine which of these cities was Barak's home. Did Barak grow up here, way up in the north, overlooking Lake Hula and the Rift, or did he grow up more in the Kadesh, down by the lower end of the southern end of the Sea of Galilee? We don't know. But Barak and Deborah certainly fought up in this area, right? They fought on Mount Tabor against Jabin of Hatzor. So he is from one of these 2 Kadeshes. Here's our Kadesh that we're looking at, overlooking the Hula Basin. Again, I didn't change the spelling on this map. Here's the Kadesh down in the southern end of the Sea of Galilee. Which one was his home? We're not sure. So here's Mount Merom. You can see the Merom range very clearly on our map here. And here's Kadesh overlooking the Jordan Rift. And this Merom is where Joshua defeated the Northern Coalition. And Kadesh is a city of refuge and the hometown probably of Barak. This is Tel Kadesh right in front of us. There's Mount Merom way in the distance, Tel Kadesh. It's right there. Some of the ruins everywhere. Ruins, we can look at all the ruins we want to look at. Sarcophagi, people die and they bury them in these stone crypts. Another city we want to look at briefly, again, it's not a biblical city technically by name. It's Zaphat or Safed. Zaphat is a visibly prominent city overlooking the steep descent of the Nahal Amud, the River Amud. We'll talk more about that and you'll see it. I'll mention it a number of times, this Nahal, for a reason you'll see in a moment. But this Nahal descends down toward the Sea of Galilee. You know, the waters that are washing all the dirt down from the Nahal Amud is what's creating that plain of Gennesaret that I've talked about. You come through the crack of Arbel onto this beautiful plain, the plain of Gennesaret. All of that deep, rich soil there has washed down from the Nahal Amud. And the top of that hill, at the top of the Nahal, is Zaphat. All right? Why do we mention it if it's not a biblical city? This city is often associated with the city set on the hill. Remember in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus said, you don't hide a candle under a basket, right? And a city set on a hill is not easily hid. And it's suspected, it's kind of interesting to think about that he could point right up here. A city set on a hill is not easily hid. And there sits Zaphat way up on a hill. So usually, your guide, when you're out there on the boat on the Sea of Galilee or down there where the Sermon on the Mount perhaps was spoken, is going to point out Zaphat. And really, you can see it from all over the Sea of Galilee region. The city on the hill, there's Zaphat. And the Nahal Amud running down, deep, deep wadi running down and creating the plain of Gennesaret down here, Zaphat. Here's our satellite image. You can see the Nahal Amud right here, washing down to create this plain right here. The city set on a hill. Here's Mount Arbel. There's the crack. Here's the plain of Gennesaret. Look at this deep, deep wadi right here. Deep valley. All this water is washing through and off the hills here and from the Wadi Amud, and there's Zaphat way up on the hill. And we're on the Sea of Galilee now, and we're on our boat, and we're looking toward the northwest. Here's the Gennesaret Plain, and there's the city. It's a little hard to see, perhaps, in the haze here, but that white little city up there on the hill is Zaphat. By the way, here's Mount Arbel, where we were standing a while ago, and the crack that leads down to the plain of Gennesaret. Speaking of Arbel, we're standing on Arbel right now. And we're looking, this is probably a telephoto, we're looking up at Zaphat from Mount Arbel. Here's this deep, deep crag. Look how deep that is. These are, towns. These are little villages with houses. The deep, deep crack running down from Zaphat and creating this beautiful, lush, dark, rich soil of the plain of Gennesaret. We are now standing at Zaphat. Let's back up. We're going to be standing, let's say, right about here, probably right about here, looking down toward the plain of Gennesaret and the Sea of Galilee. All right. The lake region, the Sea of Galilee, or the Lake Chinnereth, or Gennesaret. I've talked about the plain of Gennesaret. There's a town called Gennesaret that overlooks that plain, and sometimes, the sea is called the Sea of Gennesaret. In New Testament times, the main city, the Roman city, was Tiberias, and so they called it the Sea of Tiberias, right? So the Sea of Gennesaret comes from the Old Testament town. Sea of Tiberias comes from the New Testament town. The Sea of Galilee, of course, is coming from the region. The Sea of Galilee, as we're going to call it, is 13 miles long, approximately 7 miles wide. At its widest, it's kind of shaped, it's more broader at the top and kind of narrows at the bottom. Some say the word Chinnereth refers to harp, H-A-R-P, and it's kind of shaped like an old, an ancient harp, not so much like our harps today. I guess in a way our harps are also bigger at the top and narrow at the bottom. But in any case, 13 miles long, 7 miles wide. In Minnesota, you wouldn't call this a sea, right? This is just a pond. But anyway, are you the group from Minnesota? Yeah, we're Minnesota. We hate people from Minnesota. It's like, why do you hate us? The land of 10,000 lakes, we have one. This is their one lake, so let's call it a sea. All right, it's okay to call it a sea. The Sea of Galilee, 13 miles by 7 miles wide at the most. About 165 feet deep, depending on the rainfall and whether it's, drought. There'll be a picture here where the sea is way, way, way down. There was a period, was that in the 80s? I don't remember, when the sea went way, way, way down, and they found that, they call it the Jesus boat, because the sea was so far down. So, usually it's around 165 feet deep. The surface is at 630 feet to 700 feet below sea level. Remember, it's in the Jordan Rift, that deep crack that we'll talk about later this morning. It's part of the rift that runs all the way from Turkey down into Africa. It is the only natural freshwater lake in Israel. We have one. That's it. This is their lake. And they have no other freshwater lakes in the whole country. It's fed by springs and by runoff from Mount Hermon. Mount Hermon, that high mountain. What is it? Probably have in Galilee, I'll have a number there, 5,000 feet. I'm not sure. But everything from Mount Hermon is running down into Lake Hula, the Sea of Galilee, and all the runoff from the sides, plus springs that are gushing up. We'll talk about some of those all around the edges. That's where the water is coming from. And Israel desperately, 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 throughout all of its history, needed that water. There's the sea, the beautiful, gorgeous, wonderful, biblical Sea of Galilee. And if there aren't ski jets out there, you can imagine Jesus on the boat, right? And walking on this sea. This is where his life and ministry took place. It's just a wonderful, wonderful place to visit. And usually it's very secure there. You can feel very much at ease. Here's Mount Hermon in the north, the highest peak in Israel. And everything from Hermon is running down this way. At the base of Mount Hermon are springs that are gushing tons of water. We'll see them later out of the base of the mountain, springs all the way around the sea, or in many places around the Sea of Galilee. All that feeding this natural lake. Again, there was another little lake up here north of it, the Lake Hula. Here's Upper Galilee, the Ramah Ridge, and Upper Galilee and Kadesh and all of that. Here are the Golan Heights, over here on the eastern side of the Sea of Galilee, and we'll get to them toward the end of this lecture, all right? The sea hosted an abundance of fish. It was prone to sudden violent storms from all of the wind rushing through the Arbel Crack down from Mount Hermon, and those winds could hit the sea and very quickly cause huge and sudden storms, as we see in the accounts of Jesus' life and his disciples. The alluvial soil that's washing down from Nahal Amud and all of those other valleys off of the hills around are creating this beautiful dark soil, along with all of this fresh water, the springs, the warm climate. It makes it one of the most populous and continuous inhabited areas of the country. So Galilee is despised and hated, but when you get around the lake, it's like, it's a pretty nice place to live. Beautiful, beautiful Sea of Galilee. Let's start with the Roman city. I believe, it's probably in our notes here. Tiberias was a large Roman Gentile city built by Herod Antipas, not Herod the Great, on the western shore of the Sea of Galilee. It was a resort area for the Romans due to its natural hot springs. Think about that for a minute. So springs are gushing out from the mountains. This is on the western side of the Sea of Galilee. Springs are gushing out from the mountains around. Remember the horns of Hittim? The horns of Hittim were an extinct volcano. What's under volcanoes? Lava. If there are springs coming out of those rocks, it's going to be hot, right? Warm springs coming out from this whole area up here is volcanic. When we see the Golan Heights over there to the east, there are volcano cones all over up there in the Golan Heights and up into Syria. This is a volcanic region. Keep that in mind. So these warm springs are gushing out of the side of the western side of the Sea of Galilee, and the Romans say, let's build a city there. Let's have hot springs. People from Rome are going to come and want to bathe in these waters, and they're going to pay a bunch of money. So we'll have money to build all of these huge cities. The Sea of Galilee, again, is sometimes called the Sea of Tiberias in New Testament times because this became the dominant city. I don't have it in the notes, so I'll say it now, and I'm virtually certain this is correct. Tiberias is never mentioned in the New Testament. As far as we know, Jesus didn't go there. It's a Roman city. So I don't believe it's mentioned except for perhaps the sea being called the Sea of Tiberias at places. I could be wrong, but I believe that's correct. There's Tiberias at the southwestern end. It's right kind of under the Arbel Range, built on the edge of the Arbel Range where the horns of Hittim are. And so we now see the volcanic, right? The volcanic hot underlayment of this whole Arbel thing. And so these are warm springs that are gushing out of the side of Arbel, and they build the city, the Romans build the city of Tiberias. We're standing on the cliffs. Let me back up. We're going to be standing on the cliffs right here looking down at Tiberias, the modern city of Tiberias. Beautiful town, great place to stay if you need a place. Now we're on the eastern side of the Sea of Galilee, and we're looking across at Tiberias. It's grown clear up onto the side of the hill. The Roman city would have been down here more at the bottom. Over here, right next to it, is Mount Arbel, where we stood a while ago, and there's the crack that comes through. You can see that from everywhere. By the way, as I looked at this, there is a kind of rounded hill right here. I believe, I don't think that's the horns of a team. I think they're back here somewhere. No, you know what? That might be the horns of a team. Here's my rounded hill in the haze here. That probably is the top of Mount Tabor, a rounded hill there in the Esdraelon Valley. I mean, you need to try to keep track of all these. You definitely can see Mount Arbel, the horns of a team, and Mount Tabor when we get up on the hill of Beatitudes, the Church of the Beatitudes, on the northern side of the sea. I need to move on quickly. Ruins at Tiberias, synagogue, and so forth. By the way, start to look at now. Remember all the ruins we've seen before? What color were those rocks? Yellowish, whitish, right? Look at these. Black. Why? Volcanoes, basalt, right? So the buildings up here are going to be built of dark stone, often black stone. Keep that in mind because we're in a volcanic region. Beautiful mosaics. You know what this is now, right? A false floor would have been on top of this. Hot water, springs coming under it, creating steam rooms. That's what the Romans love. They're going to get people coming all the way from Rome to enjoy the hot springs of Tiberias. So that's not a biblical city so much as it is the Roman controlling city of the Sea of Galilee. Let's start to get to the biblical cities just north of Tiberias, right? Kind of where the crack is coming out of Mount Arbel. At the western end of the plain of Gennesaret is a tiny little town called Magdala, a small coastal town just north of Tiberias, Matthew 15. Mary of Magdala. Mary from Magdala, Mary Magdalene, is from this town, one of Jesus' most faithful followers, Matthew 27 and Matthew 28. Here's Magdala, just north of Tiberias, right about where the crack is coming out of Mount Arbel. You can stand on Mount Arbel and see Magdala down there. Here's Tiberias, there's Magdala, Arbel, horns of a team, and the plain of Gennesaret. So it's at the western end of the plain of Gennesaret. We're now flying over the plain of Gennesaret. There's Tiberias. Here's Mount Arbel. We can't quite see the peak of Mount Arbel. Very rainy season. Obviously, there's grass all over Mount Arbel. You don't see that very often. And right at the base of Mount Arbel, right here, is Magdala. Mary Magdalene. Back when I first started traveling to Israel, the only thing you could see of Magdala was this little square stone fence. Nobody had really done anything with Magdala, but now they have excavated. They've built a huge, I believe, a church there, right? A museum and all kinds of stuff to see, which I've never seen. But here are they're beginning to excavate. Now they have this huge complex with a church and museum and all that stuff. Again, I've never been there originally. All you could just see was kind of an outline of something or the other. But now it's a very, touristy kind of excavated site. And I think perhaps a Catholic controlled Catholic church. I really don't know for sure. Some of you have been there. I have not. Great excavations, beautiful carvings. If you can make it there, great. Go for it. Magdala, very, very important New Testament town, mainly because of Mary. Okay, let's move to the other end of the plain of Gennesaret, the eastern end, and the city, the Tell of Gennesaret, or Chinnereth. Tell Gennesaret overlooks this 4-mile-long plain of Gennesaret on the northwest shore of the Sea of Galilee. This fertile plain is formed by the runoff from the Nahal Amud near Zaphod as all that water rushes down and brings with it the soil that is going to create this beautiful, lush plain. Jesus retired to Gennesaret after the feeding of the 5,000. Matthew 14:34. So Jesus was at Gennesaret. Here is the plain of Gennesaret right at the crack of Arbel, and the city, the tell of Gennesaret, right at the eastern end of the plain of Gennesaret, formed by all the water running down the Nahalamud from the city set on a hill. Here's our satellite view. There's Zafad, here's the crack of Amud, and here's the plain of Gennesaret, Magdala at one end, near Tiberias, where the crack of Arbel's coming out, and Gennesaret at the eastern, the northeastern end of the plain of Gennesaret. We are standing on Arbel. We're going to keep jumping up onto Arbel to get an idea of all of this. Magdala is underneath us, to the right, where the crack is coming out. Here's the road now going across the plain of Gennesaret, and this bump here at the other end, at the eastern end, is Tel Gennesaret. There we are, Tel Gennesaret. Here's an aerial view of Tel Gennesaret. Here's the plain of Gennesaret. Let's jump down onto the Tel. Ruins, ruins, ruins. And we're standing there looking back across the plain of Gennesaret. Magdala is down here. Tiberias is just off of our picture to the left. There's the crack of Arbel. There are the horns of Hittim. Beautiful, beautiful plain. Lush, rich soil. Look at all the stuff growing there. Green plants, green trees. We're standing on the Tel of Gennesaret, looking at the plain of Gennesaret. We need to mention, it's not really a town, it's not really a biblical place as such, but there is a place called Tavga, which I believe means seven in Arabic. In Hebrew, it's Ein Sheva, or Ein is spring, remember? The spring of seven, the seven springs. Just east of Tel Gennesaret, before we get to Capernaum, is an area called Tavga, a small chapel, of course, built over the very place where the loaves and fishes were divided, and you can go there and visit it and so forth. What we really want to see is there are warm springs here. Warm, volcanic, right? Springs running into the lake. And this is a likely place for fishing in the New Testament. I grew up in Kansas. Did I ever go fishing? What do you need for fishing? Water. I grew up in Kansas. You're in Nebraska, right? But now I live in Minnesota. Fishing, 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 fishing. I don't do fishing. I don't know fishing. But apparently, if you're at Lake Mille Lacs and you know where there's a warm spot, you're going to fish there. I guess fish they're like my wife. They like warm water, right? I told you I was going to tell a joke on you today. There are warm springs here at Tavga, and it's very likely that the disciples would be fishing here because there is warm water running into the lake where the fish are going to congregate. And this could be, some say, the place where Jesus is meeting and calling some of his disciples. Matthew 4:18. Here's the chapel built over the very place. Unlikely, but what we want to do is look at the beach, and when you get down to the beach, well, there's the horns of Hittim and the crack in Arbel. But I want to see these reeds, this greenery growing right here, because where there's greenery, there's water. And so we're going to walk down there, and if you walk into the reeds and down into this water that's coming from the reeds, it's warm. It's very warm water running into the Sea of Galilee, which would make for good fishing, they tell me. And so it's very likely that the disciples would have fished in this area, and Jesus may have met them in this kind of place. All right, let's get to the big city, as it were, in New Testament times, of Capernaum. Capernaum, located on the north side, the north shore of the Sea of Galilee. This was Jesus' hometown, as it were, in his adult years. This is his base of operations. This is where Jesus lived and worked most of his adult life. In his ministry, he was here and in the surroundings of Capernaum. when he moved from Nazareth at the inception of his public ministry, Matthew 16:13. There's Capernaum at the northern end of the Sea of Galilee. There it is. Right there at the northern end. You can see that we're in the rift. There's Mount Hermon. We're in the, the Jordan Rift has already begun. Lake Hula is going to be up in here. Everything's running off of Mount Hermon down into the Sea of Galilee, and here sits Capernaum, right smack at the north end, so to speak. Many events in the life of Christ occurred here. Forgive me for going this fast, but here we go. Centurion's servant is healed here. Peter's home was here, and his mother-in-law was healed here. In fact, they found the exact house where that happened. And I came back to Capernaum one year, and they'd built this huge concrete flying saucer, ugly building right over the top of Peter's house, a Catholic, flying saucer right over. It's the ugliest thing I have ever seen in my life, destroying these great ruins, those of you who've been there, but it's right over Peter's home. So for that, it makes me sick every time I think of it. I'll show you the flying saucer in just a minute. Numerous people came to Jesus for healing. A fish was caught with tribute money in its mouth. Jesus taught in the synagogue at Capernaum. We'll look at that. The paralytic was lowered through the roof here. Story after story. Jesus returned here after his transfiguration. People of Nazareth heard of what was going on here. A nobleman's son was healed while Jesus was in Cana of Galilee. Remember, this Roman nobleman's son died, and he knew Jesus was over in Cana, so he went over to Cana, and Jesus said, okay, well, I'll come with you and heal him. He said, I command hundreds of forces. You don't need to come with me. You're in charge, and he got home, and his son was healed, if I'm remembering the story correctly. This city was cursed for lack of faith. Think of this. Jesus lived, the Son of God, the incarnate Son of God, the God of the universe in flesh, is living here. Miracles. And Albert J. McLean says in his book on the kingdom, in fact, I think he's quoting someone else. He says, disease and death was virtually eliminated in this area. Jesus said, if I would have done these works in Sodom and Gomorrah, they would have repented. And he does these works, and people are turning to him, but they really, really, really don't believe in him. And so he curses Chorazin, Bethsaida, and Capernaum for all the works that were done there, and they still didn't turn in faith. Matthew 2, when Jesus heard that John had been taken into custody, he withdrew to Galilee, leaving Nazareth. He came and settled in Capernaum, which is by the sea, in the region of Zebulun and Naphtali, to fulfill what was spoken through Isaiah, the land of Zebulun, Naphtali, by the way of the sea beyond Jordan. Galilee, the Gentile people were in darkness, saw a great light. What an understatement. They saw the Son of God doing miracles, proving his messianic claims. The people sitting in the land of the shadow of death, this Gentile, despised, hated region, the land of Naphtali and Zebulun. Light has dawned upon them. The Son of God, the Messiah, is there, presenting his kingship and verifying his claims to deity and messiahship, the Son of David, the Son of God, and they don't believe in him. There's Capernaum at the northern end of the sea. Here's the Sea of Galilee. Here's the plain of Gennesaret, Tel Gennesaret, and now we've come around the northern side. Tavga is right in here. Here is Capernaum. I just noticed this last night when I was reviewing this. Look at the horizon. You're getting up there to the Golan Heights. What do you see? What do they look? What do those look like, though? Mount Hermon is way off. I think these are clouds here, which you could think. Mount Hermon is up here, but I think it's farther left. What I noticed are these volcanic-looking things. And once you get up into the Golan Heights, the northern part, and up into Syria, you see these volcano cones all over the place. So remember, warm springs, black basalt buildings. Okay, this is a volcanic region. This isn't limestone like down in the other places we've been. This is different. All right. Anyway, North of Capernaum, up on a very high hill, is the Mount of Beatitudes, so-called. Let's talk about that in a moment. Here is an aerial view of Capernaum. Capernaum actually stretches all the way across here. You see some unexcavated stuff here. And of course, the Catholics have their Capernaum, which is where all the tourists are going to visit because that's where the synagogue was discovered. Here's the flying saucer over Peter's house. This is a Greek Orthodox Capernaum. I've never been in that part and to see if they have anything to see. I don't think they're that interested in tourists, but this whole region here would have been Capernaum. Again, I'm intrigued by this unexcavated area here, but here's where most of the tourists, in fact, as far as I know, all of the tourists are going to visit, and there's the ugly flying saucer, which we'll see again in a moment. Now we're on the sea. I mean, if you're there, you will, in all likelihood, take a boat ride on the Sea of Galilee, which you really need to do, and get a feel for being out on the sea. And now we're boating north toward Capernaum. Here again is the Catholic side of Capernaum. Here's the Orthodox side. In any case, we really want to visit Capernaum, the town of Jesus. I hate this picture. I can't stand this building, but there it is. There's a glass floor there, and you can look right down at the home of Peter, which is right here. With this octagon thing, they say is a very ancient church built over the very site. I don't worry about that kind of stuff. There are all kinds of interesting Roman ruins there. Again, I want you to see the color of the stone. All right. And here's the synagogue. Now, what do you notice about the color of the stone in the synagogue? We're back to white, right? This yellowish white kind of limestone thing, which tells us probably that this building is not the building this is not the building of the synagogue that was there in the days of Jesus, though this is built over the synagogue that was there in the days of Jesus. So essentially, this is the synagogue that Jesus would have been in and worshiped, ornate, carvings and beautiful pillars and those kinds of things. If you look at the side of the synagogue and you look at the bottom of the synagogue, you'll see a course of stones that's not exactly in line with the one that's there now, but you see the foundation of an earlier synagogue, black stone. Probably the synagogue Jesus would have been in, the building itself would have been built out of this black stone. We'll mention more about that later. But definitely you need to visit the synagogue, read the texts about Jesus in the synagogue. There's no doubt that he was in that building as it existed in his day. There are all kinds of fascinating things. You can spend a lot of time here at Caesarea. This is a grinding stone, a grinding mill. You put a big, a tree trunk that fits in this hole. You extend it out this direction. You tie your ox to it. He walks around and around and around and around. You put grain in there or olives. I don't think this is an olive press, maybe a grain press. But anyway, whatever it is, you're pressing whatever is in there, grinding it, making, let's say, wheat flour out of grain. So this is a huge grinding mill. These are little grinding mills, smaller grinding mills. These are interesting to look at. You notice this cone-shaped stone, which would be on the bottom. By the way, these are dark basaltic stone, right? Here's a broken, there's a top that sits on there. You can see the cone-shaped thing under here. This stone sits on top of it. It has two little, stanchions, places where you would, again, stick a plank in there at, let's say, a 2x4 and have it coming out this way, a 2x4 over here coming out that way. And you put your wife on one side and you put your daughter on the other side, and they walk around and around and around, and you pour your grain in the top, and there's a hole, of course, in the bottom of that top stone, and it's going around between the two and falling out in the bottom as wheat. And again, I'm not sexist, and you laughed when I said it, and everybody does. Wife on one side and your daughter on the other. What did Jesus say? 2 women will be grinding at the mill. So don't get mad at me. Jesus said it. That's what women did. the men worked in the fields, and the men, did the men's stuff back in those days. Men did men's stuff, and women did women's stuff, and girls were girls, and boys were boys, and don't get me started on that. But it's just great. It's so much fun to see this and to think about life in those days. And here are two women grinding at the mill. Now you see exactly what that looked like. Jesus said, if you offend one of these little ones, it's better for you that a millstone be put, there you go. Imagine one of these tied to one of these and thrown into the sea. It's so amazing that the archaeologists have found this stuff and help us contextualize the Bible. Again, beautiful ornate carvings of this later tabernacle. We don't have time to talk about that. Let's move up to the north, up that hill, to the Church of the Beatitudes and what is called the Cove of the Sower. Up the hill between Tovga and Capernaum, way up on a hill, is the traditional site of the Sermon on the Mount. Guess what they did? They built a church over it, right? And there is a beautiful church, very beautiful church. It's worth visiting, sitting on this hill, providing an excellent overview of the region. I don't particularly like to go into the church, but I like to sit outside of it and look down at the Sea of Galilee and Mount Arbel and all that kind of stuff. So let's do that. Let's go up to the Church of the Beatitudes. On the lakeshore, really down from the Church of the Beatitudes, between Tovga and Capernaum is what I think it's the guys from the Institute of Holy Land Studies, maybe the IBEX guys, I don't know who, discovered this cove. They call it the Cove of the Sower, and it is a more likely site, a possible site. At least it gives us a better field. There's no church built over this. A better field for Jesus casting out into the boat a little ways and preaching to the people. Here is Capernaum. Here is Tovga. Up the hill is the Church of the Beatitudes. Down the hill is the cove, this little cove, the Cove of the Sower. Let's try to get a grasp of that. We're looking up at the Church of Beatitudes. Beautiful, beautiful building. Now we're standing up there looking down at the Sea of Galilee. There's Tiberias. In the distance, here's Mount Arbel and the crack. Right behind that are the horns of Hattim. And we can't quite see it, I guess, in the haze, or maybe it's hidden. But the bump of Mount Tabor is right back in here somewhere. In any case, we want to go down the hill. There's a little path, and you can get down to what's called the Cove of the Sower. Down we go on this path, which they suggest may very well have been the Roman road. I just wanted to look at the crack of Arbel and the horns of Hattim, plain of Gennesaret, right? Let's go down to the Cove of the Sower. Here's an aerial view of that cove. The reason they like to think about this is because if Jesus cast out on the boat right here, if you look at this hillside, remember the Sermon on the Mountain? Do you remember Roman theaters? Right? They're built like this and like this. And look at this is like a natural amphitheater right here. And what they have actually done is put people either out here a little ways or down on the beach. And you can sit up here on the hill. And if they read with a strong voice, not shouting or screaming, but with a strong voice, they read the Sermon on the Mount. You can sit up here on the hill and you can hear it, because it's an amphitheater kind of area. So at least this is a place you can go and imagine, and perhaps if you have time, stop and think about and even attempt, this discussion, this talking about the things of God to multitudes of people who are sitting on this hill listening to you. This is from the sea, looking up at the Cove of the Sower. Here's a guy sitting on the rocks way above, and somebody's going to go down here and read. There's Jesus out in the boat. And here are some people down here. This is big. You could get thousands of people here, and you can hear them. It's just fun to imagine Jesus preaching to the people. Unfortunately, They have built a fence here. So you really can't do that anymore. Please don't do it now. But if you go on YouTube and you do Cove of the Sower, you, I think, can find someone standing down there and this guy sitting up here reading, and you can hear the Sermon on the Mount. All right. That's Capernaum. We've done Tiberias, Magdala, Gennesaret, Tavga, Capernaum, the Hill of Beatitudes, Cove of the Sower. Let's go to Chorazin. Chorazin stood on a high hill north of Capernaum, west of the Church of the Beatitudes. Here's our second city that was cursed by Jesus, Chorazin, north of Capernaum. To get from Capernaum up to Chorazin, you have to go up switchbacks. You start to rise from the Sea of Galilee up into the northern part of the rift, heading up to Lake Hula and Mount Hermon. Of course, that's all uphill. Jesus cursed this city for lack of faith. He was there. He spoke to those people. They saw his miracles and so forth. Let's go up to Chorazin, or Chorazim sometimes, north of Capernaum, on the Via Maris, or near the Via Maris as it heads north to the rest of the world. There's Chorazin, north of Capernaum. We are driving up the switchbacks. We see an old ruins of an old city here. That is Chorazim. Let's telephoto down to that. There is Chorazim. Let's go to Chorazim and notice the color of these buildings. Here's the synagogue at Chorazim. This is probably the way the synagogue looked at Capernaum when Jesus spoke in it. This black basaltic stone. Beautiful building nonetheless. Smaller synagogue here at Chorazim because it's a smaller town. Intricate carvings, we could talk about all of them. They did find this, which is called the seat of Moses. Every synagogue had the seat of Moses. That's where, the scribes, the officials, the Pharisees would sit and expound the word. Maybe those who read from the Torah scrolls would sit in the seat of Moses. Jesus said they sit in the seat of Moses and they make stuff up. They tell you lies. They aren't speaking the truth to you. Here's the seat of Moses. In this synagogue, they actually found it. And then the third city that he cursed was Bethsaida. Bethsaida was located near the Delta Plain, where the northern stretch of the Jordan River emptied into the Sea of Galilee. So now we're east of Chorazin, east of Capernaum. This is where the Jordan River actually empties, the northern part of the Jordan River coming down from the Hula Lake is coming down and emptying into the Sea of Galilee right here next to Bethsaida. For many years, they hadn't found Bethsaida. There was big debate on where Bethsaida is. There's still debate as to whether or not this is Bethsaida. I don't want to get into the debate. I think this probably is the site. At least I like to think it is the site. There it is, Bethsaida, right where the northern part of the Jordan River is emptying into the Sea of Galilee, this very important town to some of Jesus' disciples. Here we see it, the Jordan River running into the Sea of Galilee right next to Bethsaida, certainly a fishing village. In fact, the water, let me just get that out of the way for a minute. The Sea of Galilee was probably higher in the days of Jesus than it is now. It wasn't being exploited for, drinking water and all the stuff we need today. It was probably higher. In fact, Bethsaida may have very well sat on the beach, closer to the beach. Why is there a fishing village a mile away, mile and a half away from the lake? The lake may have been higher back then. We don't know. I mean, certainly Capernaum wouldn't have been underwater, so who knows? I'm not an expert in that. But in any case, there is Bethsaida, the home of Philip, Andrew, Peter, Nathanael. John 1. 5,000 were fed near Bethsaida, Luke 9. And there's big debate on exactly where that was and, all that kind of stuff. The city was cursed. Chorazin, Bethsaida, Capernaum, for the works that Jesus did. Matthew 11, Isaiah 9. The people who sat in great darkness have seen great light, and they did not believe. Here's an aerial view. Here's the Jordan emptying into the Sea of Galilee from the north, and Bethsaida is going to be right over in here. By the way, there's the Golan Heights off to the eastern side of the Sea of Galilee. Here comes the Jordan River, winding its way into the Sea of Galilee. Bethsaida is going to be off to our right. Here are the ruins of Bethsaida. Interestingly, more a kind of a brownish stone. Let's go to the eastern side of the sea in Gergesa, right? We've kind of done the western side, the northern side. Now we're moving around to the eastern side of the Sea of Galilee. We've done the cities where Jesus mostly ministered, Chorazin, Bethsaida, and Capernaum. What's so interesting about Gergesa? Although some translational issues exist with this name, the country of the Gergesenes, the country of the Gadarenes, Matthew 8, Mark 5, Luke 8, this is where the healing of the maniac of Gadara, right? In the country of Gergesa, the maniac of Gadara in the country of Gergesa. So, you think of the city of Newton, Kansas in the county of Harvey, right? Or the city of Lincoln in the county of Lancaster. Wow, okay, Pennsylvania, it's here too, right? All right, interesting. Anyway, cities and regions. So whether you say Gadara or, the region of Gergesa, that's on the east, both are on the east side of the Sea of Galilee. Gadara was a city of the Roman Decapolis near the Yarmouk River in Transjordan. So the city is Gadara, the region is Gergesa. Here's Gergesa, and down there is Gadara. So that's why there's some, differences of the accounts and some maybe different spellings and questions. But anyway, the healing of that maniac happened here near Gergesa. Here's Gergesa on the eastern side now. We're across from Tiberias and Magdala. There is a little place there, a little ruin of a church called Kursi, and guess where that church was built? Right in the place where, whatever. Here's Kursi, here's the church that was supposedly built in that location or that spot. Notice that the lake is way down here. We're kind of right outside of where Kursi was, that church. We walked down to the lake. The lake is way, way, way down. So this is about the time, this picture was taken about the time when they found the Jesus boat, which is at the kibbutz at Nafganasar. And it's really something to see, and it's worth seeing, and you need to go there to see the boat that is the size of and the shape of, and gives you the idea of the kind of boats that Peter and Andrew and those guys were fishing out of, and that Jesus fell asleep in, and all of that stuff. It's just amazing they found that thing. It's really neat to see. But anyway, we're standing just by the sea near Kursi. We're looking for where the healing of the maniac of Gadara happened. Remember, the demons in the maniac said, "Don't send us away to, the netherworld." I forget exactly what they say, and so Jesus sent them into what? A herd of pigs, and the pigs did what? They ran off a cliff into the sea. There aren't a whole lot of cliffs around this area that actually run into the sea. I mean, see this sloping beach here, right? But if you look down here, it's really the only place in that area where this mountain has impinged on the Sea of Galilee. The road squeezes right in between there now, but there's an area where essentially the cliffs run down into the sea. And so this is probably, again, you look at the geography and it helps you see where these stories took place. So this is called the slope. Here's a telephoto of that. Remember, the sea is not only down now, but it would have been higher in Jesus' day. Plus, this has all degraded over time. But you see some stony outcroppings here. I mean, this very definitely was and is really the only place where the cliffs would have run right into the sea. By the way, behind us are the Golan Heights. We'll talk about that. So let's go over to the slope. Let's stand in that rocky region and imagine, let's read the story about the maniac of Gadara and the pigs running into the sea and falling off of the cliff into the sea. The cliff probably stuck out farther and the sea probably was up higher. In any case, this is basically the only place that could have happened as it appears today. All right, let's go to the Golan Heights and we will be done with the Galilee and the sea. All right, we're kind of cheating here and adding to our notes the Golan Heights. Let me try to do this quickly. The name Golan Heights describes a region of the mountains and the tablelands east of the Sea of Galilee and the Hula Basin to a width of about 10 to 12 miles. The cliffs overlooking the Jordan Rift tower 650 to 1,950 feet above sea level, the entire region. So this is the western cliffs going up from the Sea of Galilee, up those cliffs that we just saw, and those hills up to that top flat part up there on the eastern side of the Sea of Galilee. This is these are the Golan Heights. This entire region generally slopes south from Hermon to the Yarmuk River near the southern end of the Sea of Galilee. The upper part of the Golan features large volcanic cones. We saw some of those in the distance in one of our pictures. The lower southern Golan is flat basalt-covered plain, which is rich with soil and crop production. It can be extensive, huge. I mean, I think of Kansas wheat fields, Nebraska wheat fields, stretching out across the Golan Plain, but it was not heavily occupied until Hellenistic, Roman, and Byzantine periods. Here's the Golan Heights, all the way from next to the Hula Basin down here to the Yarmuk River, which defines now this river, the Yarmuk, is the border to Jordan, the country of Jordan. This used to be Syria. The Golan Heights were held by Syria until 1967. Now Israel, in 67, Israel conquered them and kept them. I'll show you why in a minute. And so this is part of Israel today. The Golan Heights, this is part of Israel today. You cross the Yarmuk River, this is the country of Jordan. All right? I probably shouldn't take time for this, but here we go. We need to be quick. Gamla. Gamla is the Aramaic word for camel. I probably shouldn't take time for this, sorry, but Gamla is not biblically significant. It's significant for the Romans taking over Palestine. Remember, Josephus writes about the conquest of Gamla. It's very much like the conquest of Masada. There were people living on this outcropping of rock called Gamala, and when the Romans came and it was sure they were going to take it over, these people jumped off of the cliff and rather kill themselves than be captured by the Romans. I'm not going to take time to read that, but here's Gamala here. If you get to the Golan Heights and can visit Gamala, it's a Masada kind of experience. Here is Gamala on our map. You start to see here this outcropping in this deep valley, a kind of an island in the sea like Masada we'll talk about. They built a city out here on this peninsula of rock. The Romans came and were going to break through and conquer it, and the people all jumped off the cliffs and killed themselves rather than be defeated by the Romans. So here's Gamla sticking out as a peninsula. The city was built on this slope. I can't imagine living, I grew up in Kansas, right? Can't imagine living on a city like that. But you see the walls and all that kind of stuff, and the people went up here and rather, committed suicide than be overtaken by the Romans. That's Gamla. Hippos, again, is not a biblical thing. I want to mention it here because you see it from everywhere in the Sea of Galilee. If you stay at the kibbutz at Ein Gev, this is right there. I mean, you're right at the base of Hippos. Hippos is Greek. Susita, it's called in Aramaic. Both words mean horse. Remember, hippo is really horse. Hippopotamus is what? A water horse. All right. But hippos means horse. This place is called Hippos or Susita. An important Roman Byzantine site rising high above the eastern shore of the Sea of Galilee near modern Ein Gev. By the way, Ein Gev, as you probably know, is a very great kibbutz to stay at. I have a story about that. I'm not going to tell right now. Hippos, like Gamla, is connected to a ridge by a narrow strip of land. It became a city-state, a controlling Roman city in Golan, the Golan area. And it had a little port down on the Sea of Galilee. Here's Hippos. Again, I mention it mainly because it's just so prominent when you're down on the Sea of Galilee or you're at Ein Gev. This little kibbutz right here is this high hill you can see from everywhere on the eastern side of the Sea of Galilee. There it is, this huge hill. Here's Ein Gev, nice little kibbutz to stay at. And here's Hippos, a Roman city. Look at the switchbacks to get up there. Ruins from Roman times on top. No biblical significance, but you can see it, and so I mention it. The Golan Heights were, here's the end. We're at the end. The Golan Heights were a thorn in the side of Israel, not to mention a daily threat to Israel's people who lived along the eastern shore of the Sea of Galilee down there on the sea. And now you've got these Golan Heights 1,200 feet above them. It's almost like being in an airplane, looking down on these kibbutzim, Jews trying to eke out an existence down there on the Sea of Galilee. And Syria owns the Golan Heights. And eventually Syria decides we're going to invade Israel, along with other Arab nations in 1967. And through God's great providence and amazing stories of God's deliverance, Israel conquered the Golan Heights. They took it from Syria. They never gave it back, because to give it back is to threaten themselves again. Let me show you why. Here are the Golan Heights. People are living down here in Israel before 1967, and Syria owns this. And guess what Syria had up on those heights? The Jews left these here to remind us that here's maybe, I don't know, you guys who know weaponry, let's say a 50 millimeter gun on top of the Golan Heights. There's Ein Gev. And the Syrians had nothing better to do all day than sit at these guns and see kids, women, men out in the fields. Let's pick off a few Jews. And the Jews got tired of it. And if you're going to invade us, we're going to take the Golan Heights. And they did, by the providence of God, and they control it today, much to the chagrin of Syria.